So, Mr. Denmark, and first of all, I'd like to say that I had a chance to speak briefly with Mr. Denmark, and I expressed to him how honored I was to be able to be here today and be able to facilitate this conversation. I'd like to start where I guess we all start, right? In our family background. I know you are from Winter Haven, Florida. And I know a little bit about the family you were born into. It seems as though you were born into a family that had art. Not only it wasn't an activity; it was a way of life. It was part of your daily activity. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up in a family that was so steeped and how art affects our daily lives and what that sets you up for the rest of your life?
Yes, on two sides of my family, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, and my father, who was always busy and caught up in the activities of World War II. He wasn't around that much because he was away in the Army, but in the transfer of visits between my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, there was a very strong belief that if you have two hands and a mind, you can create something every day that enriches your life. And that's what I saw. That's what my family presented to me. My mother worked in an antique store, and her wages were very low, but my mother had an antique collection that was unbelievable. And she used to put 25 cents on a piece of work, and she would pay 25 cents, 15 cents a dime until she paid it off. And to visit her house was a museum. And this was with no money, but with the concept that art has beauty and it has value. My grandmother, she did everything. She was a quilt maker, and much of my collage work today comes as a result of my grandmother sitting me on the floor and giving me a pair of scissors and making me cut precise patterns. And she demanded that they were precise because she couldn't sew them if I didn't do them right. So I learned that, and even in getting into graduate school at Pratt Institute here in New York, my ability to cut with scissors the same way I could draw with charcoal was amazing to my professors. They just, how did you learn how to do this? Well, it came from home. And then my grandfather, who was a craftsman and a smart craftsman, he would go to city council meetings in Winter Haven, Florida, and he would tell the councilmen any condemned buildings in the city can be moved free of charge if you give it to me. And of course, they gave him many buildings, and he would have us, the boys, to go with him, my brother and myself, and he would tear that building down. He would bring it home, and we had to pull the nails from each and every board. And more than that, he had 2 anvils. And during World War II, nails were hard to come by. Mm-hmm. So we had to straighten them all out and put them in a bucket for him to inspect.
These are old nails that you would straighten out.
So he would take those nails and those boards, and being in Central Florida where the industry was citrus fruit, he would build houses for the migrant workers from those boards that he got for free. And so I saw creativity all around all the time. Mm-hmm. And then the amazing thing is that my grandmother had a strong sense of your being purposeful in your life. And she always said that if you are a boy in this family and you reach the age of 12, you're going to be treated as a man. You have to act as a man. You have to produce as a man. And every Sunday morning when she made breakfast, she asked you, what did you earn this week? And she had a chicken yard and she had a garden. And my task was to go to the chicken yard and make sure that they had fresh water. And she would tell my brother, he was younger, you collect the eggs. He's going to take care of the water. Well, many times she would set the table for breakfast and she would put a plate there for my brother and a glass there for milk and so forth, but she wouldn't put any food on it. Mm-hmm. And she would have on an apron and I would say, yes, ma'am, I put fresh water out. And she would go to the chicken yard and I had lied. I didn't put no fresh water out. So she would come back and she would move my plate from the table. And my brother would eat. So
your brother,
so
he got down.
So that's the kind of responsibility that, I grew up with. And we had a family industry. My grandfather met a Seminole Indian who had traveled to Japan. And this man had learned to do bonsai grafting, making dwarf trees and produce by grafting them. And he taught my grandfather how to do that. So then my job after that was to go around the town and collect all the pork and bean cans that I could find.
Is that right?
Because he would take the pork and bean cans, and I didn't know at the time that if you take a seed out of an orange, you won't get an orange if you plant it. You'll get a lemon. And then he would take the bud from an orange tree and graft it into a stem, and he would have 5 different kinds of fruit growing on one tree. He learned to do that. So at that juncture in history, many northern whites were moving to invest in the citrus business because Florida at that time had plenty of land, it was cheap and so forth. And we would sell them the seedlings to get started out of the pork and bean cans. So we were taught to work hard, and we were taught we had enough money for us to grow up with some form of leisure.
Right.
And my leisure was art.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to do.
This is somewhat against the backdrop of the country coming out of the Great Depression.
Yes.
and such. So this ingenuity is taking place
Yes.
against a backdrop where there's a lot of kind of helplessness.
Absolutely.
And such.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And we never went hungry. We always had money or whatever, but we had to work, And being that I was born an artist, I was drawing and painting before I ever went to grade school. And interestingly enough, my grandmother purchased a Blue Horse notebook. The school books at that time for you to write in was called Blue Horse. That was the company that made the book. Well, she purchased a Blue Horse notebook for 15 cents, and she sent me off to school, and I came home from school that day, and every page in that book had drawings on it. No schoolwork whatsoever,
Were the numbers in there? Maybe a few.
And so she promised that she was going to come to school the next day and see the teacher about allowing me to have leisure time to do drawings. So she did show up, and I was terrified because my grandmother was no nonsense. You could get it upside the head in a flash, And so she came to school, and my teacher was very young. She had just come to the school from Tuskegee Institute. And she said to my grandmother, "Oh no, he has talent. It's not that he can't do the work. He has a God-given talent, and we shouldn't stop him from doing what he wants to do." So I got away with that one. And then, so that teacher went out and purchased my first set of oil paints and a brush.
Wow.
And about 6 years ago, I was able to send her an original painting for her 96th birthday.
Is that right?
And so, yeah.
Is that right? That is fantastic.
So that's how that goes. Yeah.
Mr. Denmark, we talked, when we were talking earlier, you talked about the town of Winter Haven,
Yes.
and how it influenced you in the sense of seeing black empowerment, in a sense,
Yes.
even though it was the era of Jim Crow,
Right.
segregation. What was the effect upon you, and some of the things we'll get into a little later about how you've taken control of managing your art career? How were some of those seeds started in those early years of seeing black business owners and things?
One of the things that I saw early on in my town, when segregation was a law of the land, was that on First Street, where the businesses were, black people had every shop that was necessary for their survival in their community. They owned them, you know? And if you wanted meat, you went to the meat shop. If you wanted your clothes clean, you went to the dry cleaners. If you go to the barber shop, they had the juke joints, they had the cab stand, they had everything. And I grew up seeing people empowered with the ability to provide for their community, and then the community in turn provide for them. So that impacted me in the sense that in the art movement that we are experiencing here in America, there was a time when galleries didn't embrace African American artists. I experienced that right here in New York City when I arrived. And nationwide, there were no galleries or places where you could show the work. And many homes in the community the only representative piece of artwork would be calendar work, and basically it would be a picture of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And other than that, there was no art hung in the homes. Mm-hmm. So to me, that gave me a mission that something has to be done about this. We have to show this artwork, because here in the Harlem community, in Brooklyn, I met many of the Harlem Renaissance artists who were still alive. Mm-hmm. And they mentored me, and many of them shared with me that we are artists because we are artists. We're not artists because a gallery downtown says, bring me your work and let us sell it.
Determined.
No, we're just artists because we are born that way, you know?
Absolutely. A lot in doing research and preparing for this conversation, I came across and learned about how the importance of relationships to you, and how you have signified that in a number of different ways. I know that in your undergraduate career, as a FAMU rattler,
right?
Any FAMU rattlers out there? Yeah. I knew there's somewhere. You had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. Samela Lewis, yes, and being a student of hers. Can you tell us a little bit about that relationship and what came of that, what that fostered, being coming under the tutelage of such a kind of empowering figure so early in your life?
That was one of the greatest things that could have happened to me at that time. When I arrived on campus, 1956, to study art, Dr. Samela Lewis was head of the art department at FAMU. And at the time, Dr. Lewis was the only woman in all of America to have a PhD in fine art and a PhD in art history. And she was profound, she was a great teacher, and I was basically self-taught coming from schooling, elementary school, middle school, high school, no art teacher whatsoever. And I wanted to study art at FAMU. Well, I got to FAMU as a result of being an athlete. And they said, well, if you sign on with us, you get 4 years of tuition-free education. So I did. And when I arrived, many of the teammates that I had to participate with on the athletic field thought it odd that I would be with them for practice and go to the art center and sit down before an easel and paint, you know? And then at that time, most of the art students were female. The arts department was full of young women. So they stopped giving me the razzle-dazzle because I was near the girls all the time, you know.
You're on something.
So that stopped, and Dr. Lewis was embracing. She was brilliant in her methods of teaching. I had never heard of the High Renaissance. I had never heard of the Medici family. I had not heard of the Sistine Chapel or Michelangelo. All of that was revealed to me. But more importantly, I didn't know the history of my own culture and African art and African American art as it had related down through history. And she taught me all of that. So I caught fire and I never looked back.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Your next stop after that was to come up to the grand city of New York.
Yes.
Yeah. How did you tackle that? Was it? We know this is an era that was part of now historically we look back and see it as a larger migration towards the later stages of the Great Migration. Right. But how did you see your journey? You were coming up from Florida. Did you see New York? Was it some apprehension, or did you see it just as a big apple? You were going to take a big bite out of it?
I was just courageous, and this is a story that will probably be hard to believe, but my grandfather was very strict in terms of business. My grandmother was very generous in promoting after she had been schooled about me having special talent by that teacher. So on my way to Pratt Institute, my grandmother said, now listen, I've saved some money and I'm going to give it to you. And your grandfather is going to give you some money too. He's going to drive you to Amtrak and give you some money. So I had my grandmother's money, I had my bag, my grandfather drove me to Amtrak, the train pulled into the station, I still didn't have the money. And I stepped up on the train and the conductor took my bag and put it on the train, and the train started to move slowly out of the station. So he walked rapidly along with the train, and I'm standing in the door peeping, and he pulled out one $10 bill and said, this will make a man out of you. And it was too late for me to do anything. I couldn't do anything. So I found the seat, I sat down, and I guess before the next station stopped, under my breath, I had called him a lot of things, you know? But anyway, I came to New York City with that $10. And what that $10 meant was, you're on your own now, don't call me for anything. All right, and he made me angry. So in anger, I wasn't going to call him for anything.
I don't want to tell you anyway. I don't want to tell you.
So I came to New York, and I assumed that Pratt Institute would be like some of the universities in the South. They are open 24/7. You could show up on Sunday, the dining hall is open. You could show up on Monday or Saturday, or football is going on, and so forth. Well, I got off the train at Lafayette Avenue in Brooklyn with my one bag, and I walked all the way down to Pratt Institute.
Let's walk.
And the gate was locked. I didn't know what to do. And so I started walking back up. I walked up DeKalb Avenue, and I saw a sign that said, "Furnish room for rent." Well, I had my grandmother's money, so I went up the stoop, and one of the tenants said, "The landlord lives on South Oxford. You got to go up there and find him." So I found this guy, and he said, "Do you have a job?" I said, "No, I just got here." "Do you have any money?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, you can have the room, and when you get a job, you pay me." That's how I got started. You know?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you get to New York, you're at Pratt, and then you start to meet a kind of a cavalcade, a who's who of who we think of as historical artists, people of great kind of merit in a sense. How did you come about establishing these relationships? How does it work? I think a lot of people would be envious of the ability to kind of not only start these relationships but make them enduring. How did you draw the strength?
Going to class at Pratt Institute was exciting for me. First of all, I had to struggle with some differences in the approach to teaching art. When I was in Florida, teaching art at an African American university had certain limitations. In other words, in the drawing classes, the girls could get up and model if they had on a swimsuit or leotards or something like that. And when I got to Pratt, the model was the model. Model was nude. So my first drawing class, I was startled because the professor said, we're going to start with a 5-minute drawing and we're going to work backwards. We're going to do a 5-minute drawing and then we're going to do a 4 and a 3 and a 2 and a 1. 60 seconds, you got to get it. And so the first session, he came around looking at our work, and I had nothing.
You still looking at the
right. And he realized that it was culture shock, for me. And so the lucky thing that happened in that same building was that Jacob Lawrence was teaching there. And I was going to class, drawing class one day, and there's Mr. Lawrence going up the stairs. And I looked, I had been told that he was there, but I had never seen him before. So I turned around and followed him. And I think I touched him in the back like that. And I introduced myself because I had seen his work. I had seen his work in books, in Time magazine, and so forth and so on. So I wanted to meet this man. He was gracious. I wasn't taking his class, but he said that if I would wait after class, he would talk to me. So he talked to me. And he told me about the other artists, Ernest Critchlow, Romare Bearden, everybody, And from that, I was able to meet all of the artists who had gone to Augusta Savage's Harlem School of the Arts during the WPA period. And Hale Woodruff was teaching at NYU, and I met Hale Woodruff, and Hale Woodruff started the mentorship that I got, and upon his passing, he gave me part of his African collection. So these people were kind, and they were serious artists, and their careers blossomed, and during the height of the civil rights movement, they gave me the incentive and the courage to protest with the Harlem Cultural Council that was down at the Metropolitan Museum on Fifth Avenue saying, you got to do something about representing us. Yeah. Gotcha.
When Mr. Denmark and I were talking earlier, I said to him that how important it is for us to hear his story, because he intersects through such a wide span and generation of artists, and he is our connector to this. I would ask, there were a couple of things that the Jacob Lawrences, and I also know that you were influenced by the Willem de Koonigs and so on and so forth. What is something that you would kind of push forward, so to speak, to the younger generation? I would say that you've gone on to be really yourself probably one of the most copied and reproduced artists in terms of, in a loving way, an artist just trying to recreate what you have been able to put down over the years. What are some of the lessons that you've taken from the Harlem Renaissance artists and kind of pushed forward to this next generation?
For me, I express the fact to a younger generation of artists that what you do has to come from your soul. You have to put the inner struggle, the pure struggle of being committed to your work and your culture ahead of dollars. Because I meet a lot of artists who the first thing they do is put $60,000 on a piece of work. And I often get criticized for the pricing of my work, because there are works of mine who I did in the late 60s, 70s that is showing up in the auction houses and coming from estate sales that are reaping more money than I ever would have gotten from them. The Hewitt collection, which Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt built right here on West End Avenue in the city. Bank of America paid them about $1.6 million for that collection. And I had 5 pieces in that collection, and the highest price she paid for one of those pieces at the time was $165. And I gladly took it, because at that time, $165 bought a lot of subway tokens. Yeah, right. You know? That's around town. Yeah. So I say to the younger generation of artists, listen, pay your dues, you know, stay in your lane, be true to your craft, you know. And because of technology now and many things that were not available during my struggles and the struggles of the Harlem Renaissance artists and even later artists, now technology makes it quite easy for artists to assume that they have arrived in their own spirit, not realizing that the machine is controlling them and not them controlling their spirit and giving it to the public. Yeah.
Do you see that as a big piece of your legacy? You were maybe the first artist that I was aware of that I liked this artist. I wanted to get this artist's work, his images needed to be near me. Do you see that as part of your legacy, that you have given that kind of direction to young artists, even if they haven't come in contact with you personally, that they have understood different ways for them to distribute their work and make sure that they are seen? Do you see that as part of your legacy?
Yes, I do. I do, because for me, I visited Jacob Lawrence in Seattle before his passing, and we were talking about his migration series. And he shared with me the route that the migration series took to end up in the Museum of Modern Art. He was recently married. He needed $200. He had painted the migration series, and he took it to the Harmon Foundation. Well, of course, the Harmon Foundation was part of the WPA projects, where Eleanor Roosevelt had created this foundation to help African American artists who had gone to Europe, as well as the ones that were still here painting. Well, Jake took the migration series to the Harmon Foundation, and he got $200. He used the work as collateral to get the money. Then he never went back to get it. and he never paid them the money back. He told me this himself. So the Harmon Foundation ended up giving the work to the Museum of Modern Art. So he says, I have no regrets because it was kept intact. It wasn't split up. So the whole thing is a part of the archives now, and he's gratified that it happened that way. Well, for me and younger artists today, if I can encourage them to keep good records, to be honest about producing, because you see, the print market, the poster market, and what we might call knockoffs that might be printed in China or Korea, they kind of mess artists up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And many of the galleries that was dependent on the fast dollar produced by those pieces of paper, they're out of business now. And many of the art dealers who were doing in that trade, they're out of business now.
Okay.
So, as Dr. Samela Lewis said to me when she was teaching me, listen, I'm going to teach you to be a fine artist, but I'm going to send you over to the education department and you're going to get 12 credits in education. And I couldn't figure it out. What do I need that for? Okay? She said later on, now that you have your 12 credits in education, if you go to California, if you go to Pennsylvania, if you go to New York, you can always get a teaching certificate. And you can feed yourself while you paint. So that's, you know, something that I tell the artists, listen, because you have this gift, you've got to work harder than the average citizen. Because you can't go lock up in an ivory tower or be angry with the world and put all your responsibilities on somebody else just because you're an artist. Get to work. You have to pay taxes, you have to send kids to school, you have to do everything. But you got to find a way to do your work, and you got to be honest about doing your work. And so I tell them all the time. I don't think they're listening, but I tell them.
I think some of them are listening.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say, and since we kind of opened this word legacy up, often it's been said, and directly, I read this in a quote that was about your work, about how when people of a diaspora, and specifically here talking about the African diaspora, when we are looking for some of the things maybe that were lost to us, a certain sense of continuity, a kind of connection between points in history and such, that we look to our artists to provide that for us. And maybe it's a burden that we're putting on our artists, but we do look to our visual people, our singers, our dramatists, and so on and so forth, to provide that story, to kind of fill in those gaps. And this quote, and this quote, which I thought was very profound, was a quote about a person talking about you. And so I wanted to ask you directly, how much of that do you put on yourself in your work? How much of that, of filling out the story of the African diaspora, do you take on, in not only your work, but in your life in general?
It's easy. I struggled with it for a long time, and a long time I didn't quite understand it. It was natural for me to do certain things. They came so easy. And in graduate school, in the cutting of the patterns, or just identifying Afrocentric forms in people and looking at it. And it came to me clearly one day that the connection between Africa, people of Africa, Africa was born in me. I wasn't born in Africa, but it was in me. It was born there. I can't deny it. So I amaze myself sometimes when things come out and I say, how did I do it? Where did it come from? Okay? I stop asking myself that question. I'm just wide open to it now.
Okay.
You know?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.